Good morning, all, and good morning, everybody, to today's webinar. Special welcome to all UK GCC member companies invest in Africa, key stakeholders such as the Minerals Commission and Petroleum Commission, and the general public. I just want to welcome you all to today's local content regulations webinar, dubbed Guidance for Business in the Extractive Sector. Today's webinar is a collaborative event between the UK GCC and JLD and MB Legal Consultancy. I mean, the issue of local content has always been seen as a policy intervention to be able to maximize the potentials of the minerals in resource-rich countries, to be able to see how that goes to develop countries. As much as possible, it's not been quite an easy road, and various countries have various stories of trying their ways to enjoy the benefits beyond the taxes and royalties that are paid by foreign companies, to the extent that the resource and its development will go to benefit most of the indigenes. So these policies are always normally geared towards employment of locals or employment of nationals to be able to benefit, and also, I mean, giving businesses in terms of procurement to local companies. It's never been without challenges in all the countries that have tried to actually implement. So the implementation of local content has always come with some difficulties, most of which sometimes actually is seen as whether it's a promoter of business and also promotes investments, especially when it comes to mandatory regulations and stringent regulations, which could be deemed not investor friendly. Our main focus today will be to look at some of these regulations, laws that are passed, for which affect the way business is done, and also especially for foreign investors into the country. I look forward to a discussion where we can look at the mandatory regulatory compliances, how that has affected international companies working in Ghana, and also look forward to an open platform where we can reach the aim of UK GCC, who is a campaigner for reforms, to be able to create an enabling business environment for all that work in the extractive industry. Today, myself, Gilbert Kwesi Asase, I've been fortunate to actually have a 360 round working from the regulatory perspective to international oil company, and now providing service to the industry. So with that 360 approach, I'll look forward to moderating today's event for us to be able to achieve an open and platform to be able to discuss the issues pertaining to this. Also with me today is Lily Acquaye, who is also a partner with JLD, MB, and Legal Consultancy, who will also be supported after by Zoe Phillips, Takyi, Appiah, who is also a partner with JLD and MB Legal Consultancy. They have very rich experience in the extractive industry, and then we look forward to some interesting presentations from the duo, after which we'll go to the Q&A answers. We would also like to use this opportunity to actually acknowledge the presence of the various regulatory bodies that actually regulate both the mining industry and then the oil and gas industry. I would like to actually welcome Mr. Boateng of the Petroleum Commission. He's the Director of Local Content. Good morning, Mr. Boateng. And also Mr. Collins Enim Sechi, who is also the Director for Policy and Planning at the Minerals Commission. The order of today will definitely be, after the introductions, we would have Mr. Lily Acquaye start and give us an introduction to the regulatory frameworks, and also a presentation on how this affects the extractive and then the oil and gas industry. Lily, if you can then start the presentation for us.
Thanks very much, Gilbert, and good morning and welcome to everybody on the seminar this morning. Thank you for making the time to join us on this seminar, which is organized jointly by the UK GCC and ourselves, JLD and MB Legal Consultancy. Our presentation will be on local content compliance, and will provide sort of guidance on the local content obligations in the extractives industry, and we'll be focusing on oil and gas and mining. I'll be dealing with oil and gas, and Zoe will be dealing with the mining sector. I will share our screen here so you can see our presentation. So, this being a seminar on local content, the first question then is, what is local content and why is it necessary? I think Gilbert provided a bit of an overview whilst he was giving his intro, but we'll also say that local content generally refers to participation, goods, services, and human resources sourced locally. Participation here would refer to shareholding or ownership generally, that's shareholding or equity in an entity or in a venture. For human resources or human capital, this would refer to employment of locals within the organization or in the venture. Goods and services are quite self-explanatory, so we won't delve into those ones. The principal reasons for local content include job creation. You know, governments all over the world, job creation and keeping their unemployment rates down is a big sort of thorn in the flesh. It's something that is one of their main focuses. And one of the ways of ensuring job creation is by having local content policies and initiatives. There's also capacity building to enhance capabilities and competitiveness of local businesses and local persons to be able to compete favorably on the international sphere or international market, and also to be able to send their businesses or be able to operate internationally in other countries. Economic development is also another reason for local content, because as its people and its businesses grow, a country also develops and grows economically. The thinking also being that any profits or gains made by locals will remain in the country rather than being repatriated outside when these are held by foreigners. Other reasons include ensuring that sensitive sectors do not remain wholly in the hands of foreign interests, but are kept in local hands. Bear in mind that local content requirements are not only found in the extractive sector. There are examples of local content requirements in other sectors in Ghana. For example, we've put up the Banks and Specialized Deposit Taking Institutions Act on there, which provides that a person shall not propose to be a shareholder of a deposit-taking microfinance institution unless that person is a citizen. There's also the Payment Systems and Services Act, which provides that an applicant for a payment service provider license must have at least 30% Ghanaian equity participation. There are also various activities reserved for Ghanaians and Ghanaian-owned enterprises under the GIPC Act. The popular one, for want of a better word, is the one that reserves the sale of goods or the provision of services in a market, petty trading, or hawking or selling of goods in a store at any place to Ghanaians. I mean, every year, this provision comes into focus, in fact, a couple of times a year, when there's agitation by local traders and the spare parts dealers who allege that foreigners have taken over, the activities reserved for them as Ghanaians to trade. So this is one that is quite popular and is quite well known. The other ones include operation of a beauty salon and the retail of finished pharmaceutical products. Actually, also worth mentioning is the downstream petroleum sector, which is regulated by the National Petroleum Authority. Their legislation requires that a foreign entity must have a joint venture with a local in order to qualify for a license issued by the NPA. So you can see that local content is not reserved for the extractive industry, but they can be found in various sectors, across in Ghana. I mean, there's a fisheries sector as well. The energy sector also has a number of local content initiatives. So we will now focus on the extractives industry, where local content, it's not necessarily a recent trend. You see, it's been present in the laws in some form, at least since the 1980s. I mean, the local content drive has increased in recent years, indeed. I mean, following lessons learned, particularly in the mining sector, and the argument that benefits to locals has been quite disproportionate as compared to foreign interests, which have dominated the sector. And the recent trend is not just in Ghana, but it's international as well. There's in other countries. And one of the famous ones, or infamous ones, is the case of Tanzania and President Magufuli's indigenization efforts, which are usually cited when it comes to local content initiatives. So as I said earlier on, we'll start with the oil and gas sector, which I will deal with, and Zoe will cover the mining sector. In Ghana, although commercial production of salts began in the 70s in the Salt Pond Basin, the sector still remains relatively a nascent one. I mean, as we all know, Tallow and the partners on the Jubilee field struck oil in 2007, and the field delivered first oil in late 2010. I believe it was in December sometime. So, I mean, it's 10 years old, but in terms of the kind of sector that it is, it's considered to be quite nascent. The principal legislation pertaining to local content in the oil and gas sector, and dare I say the bane of many a company, is the Petroleum Local Content and Local Participation Regulations 2013, LI 2204. I mean, it's very well known in the sector. I don't know of anyone who's operating in the sector who doesn't know of this legislation. It was enacted in 2013, but before that, the Petroleum Exploration and Production Law, which is PNDC Law 84, that was enacted in 1984, laid the foundation for local content initiatives, and some of the relevant provisions provide that, for example, a contractor shall ensure that opportunities are given as far as is possible for the employment of Ghanaians having the requisite expertise or qualifications in the various levels of the operations. There's also one that says a contractor shall, as far as practicable, use goods and services produced or provided in Ghana for his operations in preference to foreign goods and services. We also have the provision that states that a contractor shall prepare and implement plans and programs for training Ghanaians in all job classifications and in all aspects of petroleum operations. And you'll notice that the language in that enactment, that's the 1984 enactment, PNDC Law 84, was quite permissive and not as assertive as we have right now. I mean, it's used such phrases as far as it's possible, as far as it's practicable, but the current local content provisions, which are set out in LI 2204, and the main sort of act in the sector, which is the Petroleum Exploration and Production Act 2016, Act 919, they are more assertive and more forceful in terms of local content. So on this slide, we've set out some of the objectives and purposes of LI 2204. And you'll see that they refer to some of the main objectives of local content initiatives that we mentioned earlier on: job creation, capacity building, economic development. The purposes all harken back to those main objectives. So they include the promotion and maximization of value addition and job creation through the use of local expertise, goods and services, business and financing in the petroleum industry value chain, and their retention in the country. Developing local capacities in the petroleum industry value chain through education, skills transfer and expertise development, transfer of technology and know-how, and active research and development programs. I'm reading from the slide at the moment. And then the creation of petroleum and related supportive industries that will sustain economic development. Another purpose that's worth highlighting, of LI 2204, the local content regulations, is to provide for a robust and transparent monitoring and reporting system to ensure delivery of local content policy objectives. And as we all know, PETCOM, the Petroleum Commission, takes this quite seriously. I think it's to ensure that in the previous legislation, in addition to the provisions being quite permissive, there may not necessarily have been a means of ensuring that monitoring and reporting of petroleum local content initiatives. But this is taken care of in LI 2204, which provides for the submission of local content plans and various sub-plans, which help with monitoring and evaluation and reporting. Oh, and fun fact, LI 2204 has formed the basis of similar regulations in the energy sector in Ghana and in the mining sectors as well. I'm sure Zoe will take us through that when she treats the mining sector. So we will highlight some of the obligations that are set out in LI 2204. In the interest of time, we will not be able to highlight all the local content obligations, and we encourage everyone to seek advice as and when necessary. It's always important to seek advice because every company has, its peculiar facts and its peculiar concerns. So it's always good to seek advice when required. We'll also try and make reference, where possible, to some of the difficulties faced in ensuring compliance with the requirements. So we'll begin with the requirements which fall under the broad heading of participation, which we explained earlier on, refers to ownership, shareholding, equity in a company, in a venture. Now, LI 2204 stipulates that there shall be at least 5% equity participation by an indigenous Ghanaian company, also known as IGC, to be qualified to enter into a petroleum agreement or petroleum license. IGC is a very important term in LI 2204, and it's defined as a company incorporated under the Companies Act. I mean, it refers to 1963 Companies Act in there because that was what was enforced then, but that's been repealed now, and it's the Companies Act 2019 Act 992 that's in force. So that company must have at least 51% of its equity owned by a citizen of Ghana, and it must have Ghanaian citizens holding at least 80% of executive and senior management positions and 100% of non-managerial and other positions. Essentially, what this provision says is that every PA that's entered into, PA being petroleum agreement, by the Republic must have an IGC holding at least a 5% participating interest. The LI even goes on to say that the interest held by the IGC cannot be transferred to a non-IGC. And in this way, it ensures that at least 5% participation in every PA, and this is aside from the interest that's held by the GNPC as well. So this provision ensures that at least 5% of the participating interest in the PA is always held by an indigenous Ghanaian company. And if at any time it needs to be transferred, one has to find another IGC to which it will be transferred. I mean, in general, while this ensures that there's participation by Ghanaians in every PA awarded, compliance, can pose a challenge for the IOCs. Because as you all know, oil and gas exploration, development and production is quite capital intensive, and it can be difficult to find a local partner with the financial muscle to pay their way. The IOCs may even end up having to carry this local partner. So we know it's one thing that they find quite challenging. With respect to participation, LI 2204 also stipulates that companies seeking to provide goods or services must incorporate a JV, a joint venture with an IGC, and the IGC must have at least a 10% shareholding. PETCOM has clarified this requirement by way of guidelines, which provide that, the incorporation of the company at the get-go must have the local participation. You can't incorporate and then later on transfer shares to the local partner. They also expect that parties have joint control and rights to assets. They share in profits and losses. The JV is not an investment vehicle when one invests and then sits down, but the parties all contribute skills, manpower, and are actively involved in the company. In particular, and this is one that's quite important, the local partner must not front for foreign interests. In fact, fronting is an offense under the regulations, and with a corporate liable to a fine of not less than 1.2 million Ghana cedis, or a term of imprisonment. Here too, there's an issue of finding a local person with the capital to participate fully and to fund their way. So there's a requirement for human resources as well, where Ghanaians are expected to be employed in the ventures or in the companies. For junior and middle level positions, they must be reserved for Ghanaians, and only Ghanaians must be employed in those positions. And for other positions, if a company feels that there's no Ghanaians to fill the position, they must report this to the PETCOM. And it's not just a matter of word of mouth reporting, but the position must be advertised, and they must show that they didn't get any qualified locals to fill the positions. And once the position is filled by an expatriate, they're required to find a local to understudy the expatriate and to take over the position in the long run. I'll just go quickly through this so that we can get this done quickly. There's goods and services as well, which are, the schedules to LI 2204 provide local content levels for certain goods and services. Some sectors are reserved for Ghanaians: catering services, cleaning and laundry services, security services. For legal services as well, companies have to retain the services of Ghanaian legal practitioners or a firm, and you won't find us complaining about that. There's also the requirements to use financial services in Ghana. We'll also move on to monitoring, which we highlighted earlier as one of the purposes of LI 2204. That is achieved principally through local content plans submitted by companies. And the local content plan must have certain sub-plans in it, including the employment and training sub-plan, which provides for a forecast of the hiring and training needs of the company and efforts being made for the training of Ghanaians. It also has a technology transfer sub-plan, which includes a program of planned initiatives aimed at promoting the effective transfer of technology to locals. I'll sum up by saying that where companies have challenges or concerns, we found Petroleum Commission to be quite responsive if they are engaged, and if they're engaged early. If you engage them early enough and you let them know what their concerns are, and it's not just sort of, again, word of mouth. If you let them know and you support this with relevant evidence or documentation or whatever, we find that PETCOM is usually open because they know what the situation on the ground is. So they're usually open to sort of working with people or companies to find a mutually agreeable solution. There's also various trainings being organized by companies, so locals can take advantage of trainings offered companies like Talo from time to time. I won't take up any more of your time. Zoe will continue with the mining sector.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you very much for joining us for this session. As I'm sure you know, the mining sector is very important to Ghana's economy. In recent times, the mining sector has obviously continued to grow progressively, and thereby maintaining Ghana's position as a hub for minerals and mining in Africa. The importance of the mining sector in Ghana cannot be overstated. This sector attracts a significant portion of foreign direct investment, and also it generates, I think, at least 37% of export revenues. Finally, we're also very proud of the fact that Ghana has now overtaken South Africa to become Africa's largest gold producer. It's for these reasons and many others that it's important for government to safeguard the mining industry in order to promote sustained growth and development, and also to ensure that the citizens have, ample opportunity to participate and benefit from the sector. So one of the ways that government has tried to safeguard the industry is by introducing local content laws and policies within the sector. As Lily mentioned, local content is not something new in Ghana. It's been in existence for a while, but I think now the trend is that most of the local content provisions for various sectors are being consolidated into one piece of legislation, or just to put as many of them together as possible, just so that people can take it seriously and comply adequately. The points that Lily made with respect to the local content provisions in the oil and gas sector, LI 2204, are not too different from what's been introduced in the mining sector. Obviously, both industries are extractive, but they do have some important differences which are reflected in the various laws. So I'll just move on to the laws that govern the mining sector. I mean, just briefly, you can see on the screen that there's a number of laws listed, but for the purposes of this session, we'll just be focusing on the first two, which are highlighted. That's the Minerals and Mining Act, Act 703, and the Minerals and Mining Local Content and Local Participation Regulations 2020. So the local content regulations, as I'll refer to it as that because the name is quite long. So the local content regulations essentially consolidate important mining laws and regulations relating to local content. This includes provisions from the main act and some of the other regulations, such as the Minerals and Mining General Regulations and also the Minerals and Mining Support Services Regulations. It's interesting to note that the provisions apply to a number of companies which operate in the industry. So it's not just the mineral rights holders, as has been the trend in the past, but it now applies to support services companies as well, and the holders of licenses to export and deal in minerals. These regulations came into force in October 2020, and companies essentially have 1 year within which to comply. So I think we're in June now, so the clock is ticking. Companies should put, the correct structures in place now within their different operations to make sure that by October 2021, they are compliant with these regulations. Essentially, the regulations try to reinforce government objectives with respect to a number of things which I've listed on the screen. The primary of them being training and capacity building for Ghanaians, promoting the use of local goods and services, creating sustained growth within the local minerals and mining value chain, and also introducing more stringent reporting requirements and enforcement regime. Also important to note that there's promotion of gender inclusion within the sector, which I think is very important, especially in this day and age. Local content regulations have a lot of noteworthy provisions. There are so many different provisions which deal with local content, each of them important. However, for the purposes of this discussion and due to time constraints, we'll just focus on a few highlights, or maybe should I say frequently asked questions by some of our clients in the sector. So in that regard, we'll just highlight on the topics that have been listed on the screen. The first being localization plans. Then we'll move on to procurement of local goods and services. Then we will highlight professional services. And then finally, listing on the Ghana Stock Exchange. All right, so in dealing with localization plans, I would say that as the name suggests, the localization plan is essentially the company's plan or strategy to institute training programs and policies which are designed towards the eventual replacement of expatriate personnel by Ghanaian personnel. This means that essentially the localization plan must detail the company's proposal, their specific strategy to how to train, firstly, how to train Ghanaians to take over from expatriates, and also detail which expatriates they need to employ and why they need to employ those expatriates. The timelines have been set in the regulations for various mining licensing categories. So, for example, if the mining company holds a reconnaissance or prospecting license, there are various timelines that they need to comply with respect to transitioning the local employees to take over from the foreign employees. Under these new regulations, the company is also required to give an indication of gender inclusive recruitment. What this means practically for a company is that over time, each of the impacted companies must adopt a more gender balanced recruitment program to provide more opportunities for women in the sector. I think this is definitely a step in the right direction and positive development for women in the mining sector, which I'm sure we all know is a male-dominated sector. So I think this is very positive news. Another highlight under the regulations with respect to localization is reporting requirements. In the previous provisions under the law, there was a requirement to submit proposals for recruitment of expatriates and training of Ghanaians every 5 years, but now that's been reduced to every 3 years. So what this means for mining companies is essentially having to upgrade your localization policy a lot more frequently. And also, that will naturally come with increased monitoring and evaluation by the regulator. Apart from the requirement to update the proposals more frequently, the company is also required to submit an annual report to the Minerals Commission on or before 31st of January each year. And this report must show a number of things, including the level of compliance with the localization program. Again, this provision is important because it means the regulator is monitoring operations and compliance with the program more closely, and also has the opportunity to intervene early if the company is not being compliant. We should note that where a company is found to not be compliant with the program, for instance, an example would be, for instance, if they are not complying with the proposals with respect to the recruitment of expatriates, the penalty for non-compliance is actually very heavy. It's an administrative penalty of 1 year gross salary of the expatriate involved for each month or part of the month that the expatriate worked. So what this would mean in practical terms is that, let's say if a mining company has an expatriate at post, and perhaps the expatriate was granted 12 months within the company, and for some reason or the other has exceeded that 12 months by another 12 months. And for example, the expatriate is earning about $100,000 a year. The penalty that would be payable by the company in a situation like that would be about $1.2 million. So that works out as $100,000 for each month of non-compliance. Please do be warned that Minerals Commission is actually enforcing these provisions, so it's very important not to fall foul of them. Also, as part of Minerals Commission's mandate, they're required to approve the immigration quota and applications to recruit expatriates. But before it, grants approvals, the Minerals Commission will usually check that there's no Ghanaian who has qualification or experience to occupy that position. I think that's pretty similar to what Lily mentioned in the oil and gas sector. This also means that Minerals Commission can request an applicant to advertise, the job roles more widely, and also to request them to recruit from a database that's been established by the Commission. Again, in practical terms, what this means for, the mining companies that are operating here is that with respect to the recruitment of skilled, employees for skilled labor roles, you must show that you've searched high and low in Ghana and you are not able to find suitably skilled candidate for the job before you'll get an approval to employ an expatriate. The regulations list, a number of roles which, must necessarily be filled by Ghanaians. There's quite a few of them, but, just off the top of my head, I think the HR position must be filled by a Ghanaian, finance and accounting, legal and compliance, corporate services, and a number of other roles. Okay, so that brings us to the end of localization plans. And I'll move on quickly to procurement of local goods and services. Okay, so with respect to local goods and services, I think even as Lily mentioned in her presentation, the local content laws have, even the ones that were enacted in the 80s, have had provisions to encourage companies to give preference to the use of goods and services and labor, which are sourced locally as far as practicable. So this is not a new feature in the regulations. What's developed over the last few years is that the Minerals Commission has come up with what's called a procurement list, which is made up of a list of goods and services with Ghanaian content, which must be procured in the country. This list should not be too difficult to find. I think Minerals Commission has published or should have published it on their website, and it's also been published in newspapers which have wide circulation, and also in the Gazette. Under the regulations, essentially, in assessing for tenders for goods and services on the procurement list, the company is required to select the bid that contains the highest level of Ghanaian participation in terms of ownership and management. The regulations also require that with respect to certain stipulated bid values, the higher Ghanaian participation should be selected if the margin of preference threshold is satisfied. I mean, an illustration of that, I think that's also set out in the regulations, but a good illustration is, so for bids which are valued at $4.5 million and above, where the margin of preference is about 2.5% of each other, you are required to select the entity with the higher Ghanaian participation. In reality, what this then means is that companies with the higher local content will almost always win the bid. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think because of these provisions, there's been an increased number of collaboration and joint ventures, especially in the mining support services sector. Again, this positive trend it's good to see this positive trend, and I think it has encouraged more balanced collaboration between the foreign and local services companies. This way, or this provision provides or promotes Ghanaian participation in terms of ownership and management, capacity building, and also knowledge sharing and development. So I'll move on to professional services. With respect to professional services, I'm sure that a number of the foreign companies which are dialed in today, if they're looking to enter into Ghana, probably have their team of foreign professional advisors already assembled and ready to, assist them with the process. However, under the new provisions, there is a requirement to use professional service companies for certain activities. So a list again has been provided in the new regulations, and I'll briefly mention them. So these are technical and engineering services, insurance and reinsurance services, accounting, legal services, and then financial services. Not to say that, you can't work with a foreign firm, because there's also the understanding that, some of these international companies have a global presence. They already have, foreign firms which advise them in their various jurisdictions. So they prefer to work with somebody who has an understanding of their operational contexts globally. So if there is a need to work with a foreign firm, the law now requires that you, at the very least, collaborate with a Ghanaian company to provide the service. I think this is a very important provision for a number of reasons. Firstly, it promotes capacity building for professional services, which are not exclusively in the mining sector. It also helps these companies to avoid, certain pitfalls which they would otherwise be exposed to. I think a good illustration would be, with respect to, several years ago, one of our clients had engaged a foreign firm to advise them on some joint venture relationship with a Ghanaian mining company. And they had, engaged them to advise and to draft all the relevant documentation. Unfortunately, this foreign firm didn't really understand or appreciate, the various legal and compliance obligations in Ghana. So, the documents were wholly inadequate. There were all sorts of breaches. So the company had to start the process all over again at great cost to them. And they also found that, the local company that they had entered into this joint venture with was not compliant at all with any of its licensing obligations. So the moral of the story, I think, is it's important to use a Ghanaian firm who understands what they are doing, they know what they're doing, or at the very least, if there has to be a foreign firm involved, then a collaboration between the global or the international advisors and the local advisors would be recommended. Finally, I think that's the last on the list. The new regulations have introduced some listing requirements for mining companies. Essentially, the regulations state that if the holder of a mineral right has a capital expenditure which exceeds certain limits, the company is required to list at least 20% of its equity on the Ghana Stock Exchange within 5 years of commencement of mining operations. We're not aware that any capital expenditure thresholds have yet been set, but it would be very interesting to see how this plays out. There have been a number of questions as to how, this provision would be implemented practically. There have been questions as to, would this only apply to producing companies? Would it include exploration companies? What kind of thresholds is government looking at? So there are so many questions that have come up that, we're yet to see the answer to. The plus side to this would be that it would encourage participation amongst ordinary Ghanaians who may otherwise not have access to some of these larger mining companies. Unfortunately, there is a potential downside as well, which is that there may be a lot of individuals rushing to, invest in an industry whose volatility and risk they may not fully understand. So there is some issues of concern that I think, would be addressed with a lot of stakeholder engagement and training and whatnot. This is not an unusual provision. I think the Mozambique and Indonesia have similar provisions in their mining laws. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the mining, the local content regulations and mining sector. But we'd also like to highlight on a few of the practical compliance issues that our clients in both the oil and gas and the mining sectors have faced with respect to trying to implement the local content provisions. To be honest, there have been some challenges. There have also been some very positive stories. So just in the interest of time, I will go through them very quickly. So I'll start with the challenges. The first, yes, Gilbert. I have 2 minutes. Okay, I'll be quick. So the first issue is with respect to retaining skilled employees. And we've had situations where clients have spent a lot of time and money training a Ghanaian counterpart to take over from the expatriate who is at post. And at the very last moment, another company comes to poach the Ghanaian counterparts. I mean, to be honest, these the Ghanaian counterparts are very high in demand. Everybody wants them to work in their institutions. One, because obviously they have the requisite skill, and two, to help them to comply with their local content obligations. So there have been some issues with retaining skilled labor. Another one of the issues that may have come up from time to time is with respect to monitoring investments. I think this would usually apply to companies who are not very familiar with, investing in the African terrain. In their first footing in Ghana, they would want as many of, their people, for lack of a better word, or as many of the foreign workers who they know and trust to, be in charge, monitor the investment, but not being able to do that because of some of these local content restrictions can be frustrating for them. Another issue that has come to our attention is that sometimes some of these foreign companies create all sorts of rules just so that they can meet the percentage thresholds that are required by the various regulators. Quickly, with respect to benefits, a plus side to complying with the local content provisions is the reduced relocation costs. Because most of the staff are now Ghanaian, there's less of a need to employ expatriates to fill certain roles. I mean, a client of mine recently gave a fantastic example of how they benefited from that during the COVID lockdown in 2020. He said that at very short notice, they had to ship out several of their expatriates from Ghana, but they didn't have to shut down their business because they had, sufficient Ghanaian or skilled Ghanaian staff to take over that role and continue their work. So that was very positive. Finally, with respect to increasing the labor pool, again, this has a positive effect because as you train more Ghanaians to take over some of these roles, you have a wider pool of skilled employees to choose from. So that's a positive. So in the interest of time, I'll end here and hand over to you, Gilbert.
Okay, thank you so much. So much, Zoe and Lily. And then I would like to say that I like the where you stopped. I normally would have called it a term that we can synonymously use for local content, which would have been globalization. So sometimes globalization sounds like, okay, can we bring the skill sets from outside, or from different countries and the capacities to Ghana. It sounds better than the local content when in terms of protectionism. So that's good. And now we will be moving towards the question and answer session. There are a couple of questions that are coming up, but I just want to set the ball rolling to yourselves, Lily and then Jocelyn. In your presentation, you mentioned especially that it looks like most other local content laws in Ghana are taking a cue from the LI 2204. However, the other industries, for example, mining, which is a direct one we spoke about, has been in country for a long time. Normally, if you are encouraging people for business, because this is targeted towards business people in frontier areas, you normally have promoting local content, maybe to a level of encouraging before you hit assertive. Can you share your views on this? Because it looks like the younger oil and gas sector rather has a more assertive or started with an assertive legal framework rather than the mining sector, which has actually been there for years. What are your views on this, and how do you think this has impacted on the two different extractive industries, please?
It may be, and it probably was sort of the experience from the mining sector, which informed which informed the development of more assertive regulations within the oil and gas sector. Because even in the oil and gas sector, we started off with, like I said, more permissive provisions regarding local content. So PNDC Law 84 had more permissive, or as far as possible, as far as practicable type thing. But I think there was a push, and then there was learnings from other jurisdictions. There was Nigeria. I know there were visits to other jurisdictions to try and figure out what the best practices have been or what has informed the best results internationally. And so all these informed the development of LI 2204. And as you can see from the successes of the sector, it's being impacted in other sectors. The energy sector has got new regulations based on LI 2204. The mining sector has got new regulations based on LI 2204 as well. So I think that's where it's come from. And I think companies have to have constant engagement when they feel they're having difficulties regarding complying with some of these things, because the regulators are on the ground as well. They know what's going on. So we find constant engagement with the regulators does help.
Mining. So I have a last question, even in terms of, the industry has been there for quite some time. Do you feel that the old regulations did quite significant compared to the ones that they are bringing in on? It's been there for years. Generally being a layman, I would say that you do find a lot of Ghanaians involved in the businesses. Was there a need for something assertive?
I think there was a need to evolve. The various industries and the sectors are evolving with the times. We're learning a lot of lessons from different sectors. So just because something has, managed well for a few years doesn't mean that we can't improve upon it. I think, yes, there is a need to introduce some tighter, restrictions and also compliance provisions, because now Ghana is under the spotlight. Everybody wants to come in to set up a mining company or the other. And unfortunately, in recent years, we also had issues with, foreign entities, setting up and, not complying with our laws, doing all sorts of things which were not beneficial to the economy and to the people generally. So I think with the more stringent provisions and laws and regulations, it will steer us in the right direction. One of the new provisions which stand out for me is the requirement to have a more gender balanced employment strategy. I think that's very important. As I said before, mining is, very male dominated. So creating the enabling environment to have more women join and participate in the sector is important. And this is the right time to do it. So I think we're going in the right direction.
Okay, thank you. I would now take a couple of questions from attendees. And this one is an interesting one from an anonymous person. So, how does our ally combat the local mafia or monopoly in the industry, which is actively backed by people in power and regulators themselves? Wow. So everyone benefits, so that everyone benefits, and not just the few big shots in the industry.
Sorry, is this with respect to mining or oil and gas?
I think this looks like because the mining industry law is quite new, I would presume that this is more towards oil and gas.
Okay.
They must have more information than us regarding this mafia.
Any views on that, Zoe or Lily?
The opportunities are there if there's companies that are willing to participate. It's because it's, and I say nascent still, it's 10 years old, but it's still quite new in terms of what the sector that it is. And so the few that may have entered at the beginning will have the experience and will be able to play in the sector better than somebody who's coming up now. But the opportunities are still there. And I'd say that, and there's training opportunities being offered by Petcom. I know the IOCs as well also offer training from time to time. Talo does training quite a bit as well. So I think it's a matter of getting the companies to a certain level, because the companies want to work with locals. In fact, the law says they have to work with locals, but they have to work with locals that maintain international standards as well. Or they have to work with employees that, and it's a matter of, it's health and safety and environmental concerns attached to it as well. So they have to ensure that the capacity is there in the companies or the employees they're using. So I would say it's up to the companies as well, if they feel that maybe they've been shut out, to try and get as much training as they can. If you want to work with Talo, reach out to Talo and say, sort of, what are you looking for in a partner to work with? What do you need me to have? And I'm sure they'll be able to bring themselves up to a place where they are attractive to partners, to companies to work with.
I have a few comments on this, but before I go there, I think we do have the Director of Local Content in terms of Kweku Boatin in the House, and I think that the regulators have been mentioned here. Mr. Boatin, do you have any few words on this particular question?
Hello, Robert.
Yes.
I can hear me.
Should I repeat the question, or you are?
Yeah, I can repeat the question.
So the question says that, how does our ally combat the local mafia or monopoly in the industry, which is actively backed by people in power and the regulators themselves? I think this is a perception bias in the question. So everyone benefits, and not just the few big shots in the industry.
Well, under normal circumstances, I mean, I should have ignored this question, but for the respect of the audience, I will just comment on them. You see, this country, I would say that you have to get serious for certain things. It doesn't help when people sit down and make wild and further allegations. Even if what the person is saying is true, there are no enough provisions in the LI and the legal system, the legal system, for the person to make the necessary complaint through the Petroleum Commission, even to up to the minister or to whoever the person wants to make the complaint, if he has a proof. But this is just by the way. It's very instructive for us to note that, one, the Petroleum Commission, the Ministry or the government, doesn't award private contracts in oil and gas industry. The contracts the tender process are initiated by the relevant IOCs and the service companies in accordance with their own procurement procedures. What the LI seeks to do is to create a level and favorable playing field for Ghanaian companies to participate. We at the Petroleum Commission, as a regulator, as a policeman of the process, our role is to ensure the enforcement of the regulations. The Petroleum Commission doesn't award contracts. It doesn't participate in the commercial decisions of the oil and gas companies. We make sure that, one, in accordance with the LI, when the companies start tender process, then the requisite preferential treatment are accorded to qualified Ghanaian companies. And if you read the LI, consistently, it mentioned that when a Ghanaian company can provide goods and services that meet the standards of the oil and gas industry, this industry is about capacity and capacity. You should have the requisite technical capacity, meet the HSC requirements, have the financial capability to execute the tasks that are accorded to you. If you don't have the requisite capacity and able to participate and win the contract, it's quite unfair to blame the Petroleum Commission or anybody in the government. And let me tell you, look at the global supply chain arrangement in the oil and gas industry. In many areas are dominated by few companies globally. And this is very characteristic of any industry where the capital requirement is very high, technology is very sophisticated, and therefore they require large-scale supply chain arrangement to achieve economies of scale. Now, the Petroleum Commission, to the extent possible, try to ensure that the benefits of the industry are fairly distributed among all the qualified Ghanaian companies. And through our regulatory procedures, if anybody will be fair to us, we have done that to the best of our capability in accordance with the law. If somebody there's a tender process, a company participates in the tender process and win fairly in accordance with the tender procedures of the IOCs, and there's no evidence that it's a breach of the local content regulations, we cannot go and say that give the contract to company X, Y, or Z. The tender process must be followed, the regulations must be followed by the companies, as well as the local companies who are participating. The fact that you are not successful in the contract, or in the bid, doesn't mean that somebody behind is twisting the contract in favor of company X, Y, or Z.
Okay.
So let's try to be fair. People, rather than just sit down and making these wild allegations, my advice to the person and or similar people who have similar mind is that they should focus on building their capacity. Luckily, the Commission as a regulator, through our business advisory department, in collaboration with the oil and gas industry, we organize regular capacity building for Ghanaian companies to expose them to the requirements of the IOCs and the area that they need to build their capacity. So the industry is about capacity. Well, you may find some few companies win the contract. And I think that the person may be probably referring to some Ghanaian companies that have been successful. Why do you talk about monopoly? Why don't people talk about monopoly of foreign companies? In terms of the value of contract, let's ask ourselves, how much goes to the Ghanaian companies? And the trend is happening in this country that when the foreign company win the contract, it's not a problem for anybody. But when you see his fellow Ghanaian company win the contract, people get mad. Let's move ahead. Let's move ahead, put this mentality behind us, and see how we can appropriate value, keep out value from the foreign companies into the Ghanaian companies. That's what you should focus on.
Thank you, Mr. Boati. Thank you, Mr. Boati, so much. I think the message from here is that the oil and gas companies, especially the indigenous ones, need to build capacity. And it's like when it's a glass ceiling. When you break the glass ceiling, then the companies want to continue working with only you. Thank you, Mr. Boatin. I think it's only fair that we also approach one question from the mining sector. And I actually do have a contribution from the Director for Policy Planning from the Minerals Commission before I continue. It says, I mean, the old mining local content regulations were not sitting under one document. So they were there, but they were scattered in the various documents. And the first law or local content regulation was actually passed in 2012. And then it was actually then sort of the new one was then done in 2020. So it is not fairly new in that direction. So from that perspective, I'll move to a mining question that says, what has been the response of mining and oil companies in carrying out Ghana's requirements for local content value addition? What has been the response of mining and oil companies in carrying out Ghana's requirements for local content and value addition? I think I'll give this to Zoe, more towards the mining sector.
So please, if you just repeat the question, so what has been the response of the companies?
Oh, yes, mining companies in carrying out Ghana's requirements for local content and value addition.
Okay. I think generally what we've seen is, the mining companies or the support services companies, taking themselves a lot more seriously. They are training, trying to do a lot of capacity building so that they can compete, at an equal level with the international companies. So we do see that a lot of them are making efforts to, advance themselves in that regard. We also see that there's a lot of collaboration between the local companies and the foreign companies. So for example, I mentioned in the presentation that with respect to bids for items which are on the procurement list, the entity that has the higher Ghanaian participation usually would win the bid, within certain thresholds. So again, because of that, the foreign counterparts are, more willing to share their knowledge and, experience with the Ghanaian companies so that they can also build them up to participate equally. I mean, recently we were involved in a joint venture between two support services companies with respect to a big project. And it was very interesting to see that the Ghanaian company had, as much say in, how the project was going to be run as the foreign company. So it's no longer a matter of just taking the Ghanaian on just to fill in certain percentage requirements, but they are actually making positive and impactful contributions to the venture. So that's, I think, very positive and encouraging to see.
Okay. There's a question that also goes, kindly tell us where we can find a list of goods and services that are reserved for local business under the local content policy in the mining sector. Where can we find them?
There are a number of them. I think there's the procurement list is usually published on the Minerals Commission website. And it's also been published in the Gazette, and I think it was on the graphic, if I'm not mistaken. So you can find it there, but usually you can reach out to Minerals Commission and they should have it available for you.
One key one for myself is, I've just been wondering, and it's trying to get just a little bit of comparison. You mentioned issues on JV joint ventures and then some form of technical partnerships as levers for implementing local content. Is there any direct comparisons or views that you've seen how this is working in terms of mining and then against how it's working in the oil and gas industry? And would you say that the directions on this have actually led to some positive impact on the industry?
I think they're quite similar. I mean, for me, with respect to the support services companies, especially, again, they are both in the extractive sector. They're both, bidding for similar jobs like, drilling or digging or, environmental compliance. So I think it's quite similar with respect to the mining services or support services companies. Yes, there is a lot of collaboration between the foreign companies and the local companies with respect to activities services. There are certain things which are restricted to Ghanaians only. So, for example, catering, security services, and
it's actually the same.
Yeah,
the
same.
Yes.
Okay, so waste disposal,
cleaning and laundry.
So I think it's pretty similar across board.
Okay. There's always a saying that I've worn a hat from a regulatory perspective to maybe an operator and providing service. Do you think that I mean, there've always been technical partnerships. There's always been memorandums of understandings to work to provide services if you want to look at it globally. And if always there's a challenge whereby we are asking that, okay, like the typical question, before you develop your capacity, you need to make sure you spend some time, build up, and also know that you prepare yourself and get all the requirements. Wouldn't this JV actually probably find a way of defeating this purpose in terms of, I mean, giving kid gloves to these indigenous companies? I mean, why can't it just be open like normal technical partnerships? What makes it so special that there has to be a legal backing to form JVs or the marriage?
So it's essential that it actually works. Like you said, there have been MOUs and things signed in the past, and they've been used as fronts, which is why LI 2204 actually mentions fronting and says you can't front. So I think it's a way of ensuring that what's supposed to be done is done. And that if you have a JV, it's actually a JV where both parties are involved in, there's actually technology transfer from the foreign partner to the local partner, and that, the capacity building is actually taking place, and it's not just something that's on paper to ensure that, the company is able to work, but it's actually happening and the capacity is being built for companies on the ground.
No, but I mean, just to give an example of maybe what Lily is talking about, in the past, we've had we've seen a situation where a company, in trying to meet, some local content requirements, actually, asked, the driver, who had absolutely no influence, no say in what happens to the company, to take shares in the company just so that they can tick a box. Do you see? So that's happening. He doesn't have any real participation. He's just there, to tick a box for the regulator. So I think with these regulations and the way the law requires that you implement them, it ensures that the training, the development, the knowledge sharing is actually taking place. And I think the regulator is also taking time to monitor, that, to monitor how you are implementing it and to ensure that it's working. That's why they've asked for you to submit reports more regularly, and also to inform them of, your compliance annually. So I think it's working.
I will come to this monitoring issue later, but I just want to read a contribution from the Minerals Commission, which is from the Director of Policy Planning, that says, generally, the mining companies have been receptive to the implementation of local content issues. Mining companies are enjoined by law to submit 5-year procurement plans to the Minerals Commission for approval. The plan must take into account a local procurement list, which is published by the Minerals Commissions annually. The local procurement list can be found at the website of the Minerals Commission. Okay, and he also says that the local procurement list now contains 29 items. So I would, encourage all the companies that are listening that this is a good opportunity for business. You can see the items of goods and services that have been listed, and then you can use that as a means of preparing or gearing yourselves for that. I will then come to one quick one on mining, and then a very interesting question when it comes to Galamsey. So the question goes like, how does the local content regulation affect, or whether it has impacted on Galamsey in the mining industry? I don't know whether maybe Collins would have been the best person to answer this question. So Collins, please start preparing to type in your response. But before then, I think I want to jump to Mr. Kweku Boateng once again on the issue of monitoring and implementation of this. There's been challenges, like you said. There's been companies struggling to actually participate in businesses, and also you've set up rules. There are laws trying to promote local content, and I can say I've seen different forms of approach or different gears and levers that the Petroleum Commission has been using. Where are we now, and what can you say is the performance of monitoring and evaluation in the oil and gas sector with regards to implementing local content laws or the regulations?
I guess that your question was about the monitoring and enforcement of the regulations. Is that the case?
Yes, please. I mean, we've seen they are quite direct. I'll ask you, Zoe, whether someone has paid the 1.2 million penalties yet or not. But Mr. Boateng, please tell us how you're approaching this, and whether there has been some penalties in terms of monitoring and evaluation.
Certainly, there have been some fines, few fines on the companies that have been found breaching the regulations. A number of companies have been fined. But I see, for effective regulatory mechanism, the purpose is not to wait for the companies to breach the regulations and fine them. Fines are not what we are looking for. What we are looking for is compliance for the companies to do what they are supposed to do, so that we achieve the objective of the regulations. Now, if you look at the LI makes provisions for enforcement and regulations, but practically, on the part of the Commission, a number of measures have been put in place to ensure compliance with the regulations. One, you have a reporting requirement for all the companies with respect to what they are doing and how they are meeting their local content obligations. The companies are required to report on most of the activities quarterly and annually. You review these quarterly reports, check it, and make sure that what they are presented to us is in accordance with what exists in reality. We have cost audit department that actually request for actual receipts on spending by these companies to check whether what the companies are claiming with respect to procurement of goods and services locally are really the case. In addition, you have the monitoring and evaluation department that periodically also go around and visit these companies to check their facilities and also assess the extent to which Ghanaian partners in various JVs are participating in the work of the JVs. We also have another leg of monitoring, whereby we cross-check information from the companies. If you look at the service companies, we check the information they provided to us against what the IOCs also provided to us with respect to subcontracting to the subcontractors, to verify whether these information are consistent. The effective tool that we have been so far devised is the actual visit to the facilities of the companies, and also review their local content reporting to ascertain whether they are complying with the regulations or not. So monitoring, to the extent that there are challenges, I think we are doing our best. But again, just like any other regulator, there's always information asymmetry in favor of the regulatees. So no matter the system you put in place, to solicit information from the companies to help in your monitoring and evaluation activity. The companies, in many cases, are always one step ahead of the regulator. The sense that they have processed the requested information that is required by the regulator to monitor them. We always learn, just like policemen, the criminals are always ahead of the police people. So we always try to put measures in place to ensure that you get the requested information from the companies and monitor the activities. So we learn every day, but I think that we are doing quite well in terms of monitoring and evaluation.
Okay. Mr. Watson, there's quite a direct question here. Laws are only as good as the enforcement behind it. There are clear cases of the law being breached by the foreign companies, positions reserved for Ghanaian crew not even filled by Ghanaians, and yet the rigs operate in Ghana. Can the panel or attendees share any information as far as punitive actions that have been taken by regulators against defaulters?
You mentioned positions reserved for Ghanaians. That's what you said.
Yes. For example, I mean, where the clear flouting of laws, has there been any punitive?
Yeah. You see, when it comes to the employment in the oil and gas industry, the law is very clear that in areas of employment, preferences should be given to Ghanaian professionals. So when a Ghanaian possesses the requisite skill and experience required for any position, the law requires that employment opportunity should be given to a Ghanaian. The law also requires that junior level and middle level position should be given to Ghanaians. So the commission, in accordance with our localization strategy, we ensure that every position in the industry that we have a requested Ghanaian available to occupy, that position is made available to Ghanaians. In a situation where Ghanaians are not available, they have to bring expatriates. They have to make a justification why they are bringing the foreign worker. And before the approval is granted, they have to submit a training program accompanied by a training budget, as to how and when they will train a Ghanaian, either on the job or on academic training, for Ghanaian to acquire the position. And I think that, well, to the large extent possible, we have achieved that goal. If we look at the localization ratio in Ghana, we are looking at the region of around 75–80%. It varies because as the level of activity changes, the ratio varies. When you look at the countries that are in the similar level of development as far as oil and gas industry is concerned, I think that Ghana is not doing badly. Even when you look at the areas such as core technical positions that are very difficult to localize, in view of the emerging nature of the industry in Ghana, at least 60%, 60–65% of the core technical jobs are occupied by Ghanaians. Similar percentage can be also seen in the area of managerial jobs. So the questioner might have seen probably one or two cases where some expatriate workers are working over there that you think that should be occupied by a Ghanaian. I mean, our doors are open if anybody has really noticed some positions that he or she thinks that Ghanaians should occupy and be occupied by foreigners. Please let us know. We will review the situation and we will handle it. But as I said, our localization team is very abreast of what they are doing, and in collaboration with the Ghana Immigration Services, we make sure that jobs that are supposed to occupy Ghanaians are occupied by Ghanaians.
Thank you, Mr. Boateng. Just a quick one. I think that these discussions also goes to, I mean, both the panelists and also Mr. Collins. I think local content also goes with support. So I think the challenges that most service companies are facing, both it will shock you that both the the international big support service companies, as well as the indigenous service companies, both medium scale and even the startups. It's about support. Is there any support in the direction of government for businesses? I know there are some support in terms of personnel and workforce. What about direct support for businesses to be able to overcome some of the challenges to provide the services? I mean, the certifications cost a lot. The capacity building to actually partake and benefit in these opportunities cost a lot. Do we have anything? This is the last one. Do we have any support from government or, I mean, the law enforcers or the commission or minerals commission to support local companies to partake in this?
Okay, so when you talk about support, I mean, any support for the indigenous Ghanaian companies should aim at addressing the structural challenges that are faced by these companies. And these challenges can just be found in a few areas. One is the capacity, their technical capacity, the ability to meet HSE requirements, the financial capacity in terms of access to credit and cost of credit. There are a lot of challenges like the business management procedure. So whatever support that we want to give to this company should aim at this. Let me tell you what the commission is doing. In terms of technical the capacity, there are some challenges. You just mentioned one, which I'll go directly to it, is the certification, which is really a big challenge. In many technical jobs in the industry, there are requirements for certification. Even in jobs that people see as simple as catering, for instance. If you want to provide offshore catering, there are about 3 or 4 technical certifications that you have to comply with before you can even get a contract to provide catering offshore. And that's what, in my first response, that people said there's monopoly here and there, mafia here and there. Somebody sitting back and look at catering and say, oh, catering is about cooking. Everybody can do it. But let me tell you, if you want to provide catering service offshore, you don't need an investment less than about $2 million. You need the relevant containers, the approved kitchen in accordance with the certified bodies. The people going there should meet certain basic health requirements. We need the containers, and there are so many requirements. The same applies to many technical jobs in the industry. Certification costs money. Now, the challenge that we have is that if the companies don't have businesses, they don't have jobs, it's very difficult for a number of them to raise the requisite funding to acquire certification. And what even makes it worse is that some of these certifications, even if you are not working, it's very difficult for you to really be certified. So, and the other challenge with the technical capacities, the business operating procedures, like the accounting procedures, their HSE and the management system they have in place, their governance system, so that they can meet the anti-corruption requirement of the IOCs. Commission have, as I said earlier, you have business advisory departments that work with the IOCs. Those who participated recently, we had you have had about 3 this year. Last quarter, you have about 3 seminars where you invited the practitioners in the industry to take the companies through the various areas of concern to the IOCs to build their capacity. We are also working with Ghana Standard Board to make sure that some of this international certification, we can localize them to make it easier for Ghanaian companies to acquire those certifications. That process is ongoing, and I hope that we'll be able to reach a conclusion of the matter so that we can simplify some of the process of acquiring this international certification for local companies to acquire them. Okay. On the area of finance, which is also a big worry. For many contracts, the company have to demonstrate that they have the financial capability to execute the contracts, so that in the midway of the contract, the company will not be short of money, because most of the contracts are pre-financed. You need to be able to raise the mobilization fee or financial requirement. Now, just like many businesses, oil and gas businesses are also normally funded through credit. The nature of our banking industry over here is that the banks, I have to say, quite bluntly, are very, very risk averse. In situations whereby the companies even hold contracts, they are still very reluctant to give them the credits. They require guarantee here and there, which makes cost of borrowing very high.
Mr. Watson, not to cut you, but if I may ask in that direction, is there something that the Petroleum Commission is doing to support in that direction? I mean,
we are currently in discussion. We are preparing what you call financial service guidelines. We have had consultation in the past with the banking institution. Currently, just about a week ago, last week, we had a meeting with Bank of Ghana to review the financial service guideline. The purpose of financial service guideline is not only to offer opportunity for Ghanaian banks to the oil and gas industry, but also create and enable field for our banking institution to offer credit to the oil and gas industry. So that guideline is in the process of, is advanced stage of completed. Commission doesn't have money to give to the companies on national term. So that is not the, but what you can do is to facilitate acquisition of funds. And one of the challenges is the access to credit. Here, a typical business man can have to borrow at the interest rate of double digit of 20+%. Whilst a competitor from foreign company borrowing from Japan, from China, or even Europe, we borrow at the interest rate of about 5% or less. So from day one, the differential in interest rates put Ghanaian companies at big disadvantage. This problem is quite beyond the Petroleum Commission or the regulator. But we are working with the banking industry to see how we can resolve it, that challenge in terms of their assessment of risk for oil and gas industry, so that they can reduce the interest rate. They can just what they call it, appreciate the risk premium they attach to the loans and give the Ghanaian companies in the oil and gas industry a kind of favorable interest rate to enable them to compete. But it's a challenge that we need to really tackle.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Thank you so much. I'll leave the last few minutes to give the response from the Minerals Commission on some of the questions. So I think from Collins, this is a response on the Galamsey, I think, which is that ownership of small-scale mining has always remained with Ghanaians since the PNDC law was passed. Provision of contract mining services to small-scale miners was also reserved for Ghanaians when the mine support services regulations were passed in 2012. So in terms of the law, there's no room for non-citizens to partake in small-scale mining. Galamsey refers to illegal mining, and it has come about as a result of several factors, including non-availability of viable or mineral-rich areas to be licensed to citizens, lack of understanding on the differences between surface rights and mineral rights, which compels surface rights holders to permit people to mine without any license, very attractive gold price in the world market, and then the economic situations in our rural areas have led to this menace called Galamsey. And then there is a last one that says that on the finance part, in terms of Minerals Commission, unfortunately, the regulator does not have the ability to provide direct financial assistance to the mine support service companies, but the regulator believes that by making the necessary policies and regulations which reserve certain services for provision by only Ghanaians is a step in the right direction. A contract from a mining company is as good as money for the service provider to approach a financial institution to seek financial support and enable the companies to bid and win contracts. There was a question about even in the mining sector, local companies. Okay, so even in mining, the local companies really struggle before they win contracts. Yet the Mineral Commission requests that local companies pay an amount between $5,000 to $10,000 annually before they are allowed to work in the mines. And this is a plea to Mr. Nim. Kindly do something about the fees for us because it is too much. Okay, so I think I will end on that plea note to the Minerals Commission and even also to the Petroleum Commission. If there are any fees that can be reduced, we will plead that you reduce, and then if there's any support that the regulators can provide for us on these very assertive local content regulations and guidances, you do provide that for us. I'll use this opportunity once again to thank UKGCC for hosting this in collaboration with JLDMD partnership. We thank you for the presence, Mr. Kweku Boatin and his team, as well as Mr. Collins Enim Saki, for your very insightful contributions. Local content conversations would always continue. I mean, in certain lights, it's controversial, it's interesting, it's heated. You could have a whole day to discuss all these and many more, areas. But for today, we just want to thank everybody that is participating, those that came and went off. And then you can actually, there are some links for UKGCC that have been posted in the Q&A session. You can follow the UKGCC on Twitter, on Instagram, and then add your voice to enable us or the UKGCC and the common populace to affect the laws which we find ourselves in. We believe this session was useful, and then do not hesitate to give feedbacks to the various avenues that have been posted on the Q&A. We thank you all, and then we look forward to many other sessions and your involvement. Thank you. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Joycelyn.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll meet on another forum. Have a wonderful day, guys. Bye.